So welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our latest Tiny webinar, The Far-Reaching Impacts of Workplace Incivility with Dr. Katherine Hamilton. My name's Ali, and I work here on the marketing team for TINYpulse by Limeade. As you may or may not know, TINYpulse is a complete software solution designed to improve employee engagement, recognition, and help create more impactful one-on-one coaching methods. So if you want to find out more about TINYpulse in general, you can just visit tinypulse.com. But of course, there'll be links in your inbox after the webinar. And with that, it will be my pleasure to introduce your speaker today. Dr. Katherine Hamilton has a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from Penn State, plus 20 years as a researcher. So she really knows her stuff. As you will hear in Dr. Hamilton's presentation, workplace incivility can have disastrous impacts on employee productivity, engagement, and well-being at every level of your organization. So we hope that after this presentation, you'll be able to walk away with key takeaways to help stamp out incivility before it spirals out of control to apply in your organization right away. And last thing to note is that if you have any questions or want to make any remarks during the presentation, we encourage you to use the chat feature. And then if we have time, we'll have some questions at the end. And that's all from me. Over to you, Dr. Hamilton.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Ali, for that intro. And I'm so happy to be joining you here today. Like Ali mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the impact of incivility on organizations, and it's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I've seen people, really have a very negative impact, very negative experience in the workplace due to incivility that could easily be resolved. So I'm hoping, like Ali said, that you'll walk away with some specific tools that you can take back to your organizations and really help to shift the climate there. To make sure that people feel more comfortable and more, help them re-engage in the organization. So thanks for joining us from wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whatever time zone you're in. I'll just go ahead and share my slides here. Let me pull those up. And what I'd like to do is just give you a quick introduction. Ali already mentioned who I am. I've been working in academia for quite some time, and just my connection to TINYpulse is I work for the organization as an independent contractor. And so I come in on a per contract or per project basis and help with various activities. Helped with building the engagement survey and creating action plans around that and some of the other scales and some client work there. So I'm happy to be doing this in a different capacity, kind of walking through some of the content knowledge that we have here in this very important area. So what I hope that everyone walks away with today is to really be able to find incivility, to detect incivility in the workplace. And you'll see in a moment why this can be difficult, due to the kind of amorphous nature of incivility. It's hard to define, it's hard to detect. So I'll give you kind of some concrete examples to better understand what that looks like. We'll talk about some of the causes. So why is it happening? You'll see that there has been an increase of incivility across time, and we'll talk about what are the things that are driving some of that. We'll discuss some factors that amplify incivility. So, there are various things that make certain groups more vulnerable to be targets or even to experience incivility in more distressful ways. And then, of course, talk about how to reduce its negative impact on whether it's stress, well-being, performance, just overall organizational effectiveness. How can we fix this, right? So the fact that you're here means that you already know that it's an issue, right? It's a problem, and I'm sure it's impacted you in some way. So this is kind of the meat of the presentation, understanding what can we do that we know that put our finger on it, how to better. Okay, it says my connection is unstable, but yeah, how to better pinpoint or target it. What can we do as a result? Okay, so I just want to start off with kind of just a broad definition so you understand exactly what workplace incivility is. So this definition, this concept has been something that's been studied since the 90s. So I have Anderson and Pearson's definition here. Lilia Cortina is also a big, one of the early researchers on this topic. But the key thing I want you to hone into in this definition, it's fairly long, but the key thing I want you to hone into is that it is a low intensity type of deviant behavior. So workplace incivility falls into that category of workplace aggression or violence, but it's not as overt as something that would be breaking a law, right? So it's more, you can't really figure out the intent behind it. The intent to harm isn't as clear. And it's low intensity, but the fact that it's low intensity doesn't mean that it doesn't have a negative effect. What happens is it's low intensity and it's repetitive. So that combined is this repetitive stress that people are experiencing in organizations. A lot of times organizations would overlook workplace incivility because they think, well, it's kind of inconsequential, right? That they argue away and say, that's just how Alex is, or, that's just how Jane is. It's not necessarily realizing that the behaviors that those individuals are engaging in can really be eating away not only at the employee, but also at their colleagues, and even it can have an impact on your customers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, it's a very real stressor, and it is something that also in organizations. What I in the chat, tell me what you've seen as behaviors that are uncivil in your organization, wherever you're coming from. Give me an example of things that, it's not overt violence, it's enough you to pause and really engage in a level of rumination in your day. So I'll look in the chat here to see what's coming up. Any examples of incivility? You can see people are coming from all over the place. Iowa, DC, Idaho, welcome. Australia, Seattle, Kimmy. It's Missouri, Virginia, San Diego, Wisconsin, Michigan. All right, that's awesome. Okay, so we got some examples of incivility. Yes, Kingston, Jamaica, that's awesome. Cutting people off, definitely that's one that comes up a lot. Rude comments, snarky comments, dismissive, lack of respect for others' experience, tone of voice. I'm seeing a lot with comments here. So things people say and how they say it. Passive aggressive behavior. Yeah. Standing very close. Okay. So proximity. So kind of breaking, one thing is the breaking of a norm, right? And social normation. Yes, that's one. That comes up a lot, not only hiding information, but kind of giving you information in pieces where you're not able to really get your job done effectively, or giving you misinformation, refusing to pull records for one employee, then telling another they did not understand. So kind of, I'm hearing some sabotage happening there, assuming the worst. So attitudes, more stuff about remarks, jokes. Oh, okay, blame, assigning blame to others. Okay, blaming others. Oh, profanity, non-inclusion, micromanaging. So really focusing a lot more on tasks and not giving people the leeway to do what they need to do. Okay, so we got a good list going here. Yelling, swearing, oh gosh, not cooperating, taking instructions. Okay, we have a fairly good list here, and I think the theme, I miss non-inclusion. Yeah, that kind of being excluded or isolated from the team. Micromanaging is coming up in the opposite direction. So wanting to be micromanaged. That's interesting. Okay, mood swings. All right, so I'm going to transition back to the slides here. Thank you for all those wonderful recommendations there, or chiming in. And it can be really difficult when you're not only experiencing it yourself, but also witnessing some of that. And I'll talk about what the research says about that as well. But here are some of the examples. Let me hide my panel here again. So here's some of the examples that we typically see when measuring incivility. So some of these are taken from a popular measure of workplace incivility, and this can really help you pinpoint what the nature of your culture is. So looking at your organization, how often is this happening? Are there particular perpetrators of incivility? A lot of the things that you've mentioned so far have come up, regarding jokes being made at your expense. Someone mentioned exclusion, so being ignored by others. I've had those situations where I'm walking down the hallway and I say good morning, and the person just continues walking, and I'm like, well, I can't really understand. Did they not see me? Did they not hear me? And this is the problem that it poses for organizations, right? They don't know how to respond because it's not overt. And this is the issue with incivility. It's just these slight, subtle, repeated paper cuts that really start to make you question, a lot of the comments that you had in there. It would make you question qualifications, your ability to do your job, your skill level. Some of the things in here, making condescending comments towards you, not using a professional manner in addressing you, having derogatory remarks. You would question your qualifications. Am I a good fit for this position? Some of the things around it, being excluded from social gatherings or being ignored by others, you start to question your identity. Or, am I a good fit for this organization? Even socially, you start feeling isolated. So these are things that really can start to eat away at someone's self-esteem, their psychological health, their physical health, and even their productivity, right? So these, you look at this list, there's individuals in your organization, or even the leaders in your organization who often set the tone, who set the climate for civility. And you can judge, is this an issue for us? How often is this happening? We always have moments where things are more stressful, have periods of demand around the holidays or around a big deadline, or in particular departments, then this is something that needs to be addressed fairly quickly. So I want to highlight the prevalence of incivility. And Christine Parath, whose name I have mentioned here, she has done some really lovely work on this topic. I really recommend her book, Mastering Civility, and she also has a more recent one, Mastering Community. And she's a professor, I think she's a professor in management, and she does some really great work on this. And what she did was, this is a study where she looked at 2,000 frontline employees across 25 industries, and these are people spread out different industries across the globe. And she repeated this at different time points. So in 1998, she found that 49% of employees reported that they were being treated rudely by a colleague at least once a month, right? 49%. So almost half. Now, she did this again in 2011, and that went up to 55%. 2016, 62%. She recently replicated this and it was at 76%. So it just shows the increase that we're seeing in our society, in organizations, regarding higher levels of incivility taking place. I think what's also notable is that 78% of employees said that they witnessed incivility at least once a month, so that's higher than personally experiencing it. And 70% report any witnesses witness incivility 2 to 3 times a month. So, that's even higher there. Okay, now let's talk about the impact. So we know this is an issue. What impact does this have? The main one, I would not be working for TINYpulse or Limeade without mentioning stress, right? So stress is something that incivility is definitely strongly tied to. There have been reports of lower well-being, lower health. Some of the things that I have noted here are increased levels of psychological distress, anxiety, greater job stress, lower after work psychological detachment, poor next morning recovery. So it's harder for people to come back to work because there's this rumination that happens. So after the event or after a period of repeated events, of encounters with someone who's being uncivil towards you, you start to get into your own head. And so it can be harder for you to recover and come back to work refreshed. And so that's what the next morning recovery is, that being kind of bogged down by the stress of previous days, so that you're not really resetting each day. You're just pulling everything from previous encounters with you into the next day, which is not healthy. We also have to think about the coping mechanisms people are using and how that fuels stress. So, people often end up having less sleep. That causes more stress as a result. If they're using ineffective means of coping, whether resorting to things like smoking or drinking or things like that, that can also lead to poorer health, physical health, and increased stress. Within stress, we've seen links to depression and also higher work to family conflict. So it's not only impacting people within the workplace, but that leads into the home life, right, as well. Lower performance and motivation. It's not only the emotional impact that incivility has, it also impacts your performance. Some people in the chat had mentioned people excluding information. So you can't get your job done. So that makes sense, right? Literally the act is preventing you from doing your job effectively. But if we think about the psychological impact of incivility, what happens is that it starts to interfere with your mental processes. And research has shown that, they've done controlled studies where undergrads, and they rated the undergrads and then had them do some as a group, and then had them do some activities like complete some anagrams and brainstorming tasks, and they found that their performance was actually worse, and their level of creativity suffered as well, right? So that's kind of in a controlled setting. But even in organizations, what we see is that 63%, and this is Christine Perez research, she found that 63% of workers admitted to losing work time because they were actively trying to avoid their offender. So the fact that you're avoiding your offender means that you're not really focused on your performance, right? Not really focused on your job. 48% of employees admitted to intentionally decreasing their work effort when they were subjected to workplace incivility. So it's kind of like, well, I'm not gonna, that's a motivation piece. And I don't think that I have a cognitive to invest in this. There's lower engagement in the task. Research has shown that it disrupts your cognitive processes, such as memory. I mentioned before, lower creativity. For motivation, they found that 66% cut back on their work efforts, and 80% are losing time worrying about what happened. So that's the rumination piece that I mentioned earlier. So that is also impacting the bottom line, right? It's impacting or level of performance and motivation. Then we have satisfaction. So incivility has been linked to, you think, only job satisfaction, but it's not just that. People not only lose their level of satisfaction in their work, but they have lower co-worker satisfaction. Often there's this quote that it's not the words of your enemy that you remember, but it's the silence of your friends, something along those lines. And so it's the fact that you're looking around for a sense of support. And if you're not able to find that, if everybody accepts that norm of incivility, it can really make you lose faith in your coworkers, in your supervisor, and even in the organization, right? So it's been linked to lower levels of supervisor satisfaction, lower institutional satisfaction. Some studies have even shown lower marital satisfaction, right? You take that stuff home with you, and you're trying to process it with your significant other, and that can often cause, greater levels of conflict in a marriage, right? Depending on the nature of the situation. Research has shown it depletes mental, emotional, and social energy, fuels hostile emotions to yourself. And this is why people view incivility as a bug, right? Because it's almost like an infection that happens in an organization where there's this attack. And so people who experience the incivility are likely to perpetrate it themselves, right? So whatever you see, whatever you experience, oftentimes you end up doing as well. And so things can kind of spiral and get out of control in those situations. Hence, higher counterproductive work behaviors and withdrawal. The opposite of counterproductive work behaviors are what we call organizational citizenship behaviors, and these are behaviors where people are helping each other. And OCBs are really helpful for an organization's bottom line, right? So we don't quantify it, but if we did, the organization would realize that they're getting a whole bang for their buck when they can find someone who loves to reach out and help others. A helpful employee is very valuable employee in an organization. And so we're seeing that when you have a climate of incivility, people tend not to want to help each other out, and in fact, do the opposite, right? There might be some element of sabotage, right? Just as in the chat had highlighted, there might be small things that people are doing. It doesn't have to be as overt as trying to take your laptop or something like that. But there can be smaller counterproductive behaviors where people are coming into meetings late. They're not really as engaged in the meeting, but they're providing deliverables on a delayed timeline. Withdrawal behaviors, it's associated with absenteeism, lateness, and even we can see higher levels of turnover, right? So that all falls into this category, higher turnover intentions, and people leave, which is a very expensive problem for organizations. And then there's poor customer experience. And this is one that we tend not to think of. I think oftentimes we think of incivility impacting the individual, but it not only impacts the individual, but also, the people around them, the people that are witnessing the incivility. And sometimes this includes customers. So, um, customers are often, well, there was a research study done, I think this was Christine Parath as well, where she found that 25% of employees who claimed uncivil treatment were more likely to take out their own frustrations on customers. And so I'm sure you've been there. I know when I'm traveling, my flight has been delayed. I hate being like the 10th or, later person in the line, because once I get up to that desk, I know that this person has been exposed to so many irate customers that they themselves have probably lost the ability to regulate their own emotions, right? So a lot of times with frontline workers, there's this concept of emotional labor where you're regulating your emotions so much throughout the day that it actually becomes laborious for you, right? It's hard for you to manage that consistently. And so that's a definite source of stress. And sometimes that bleeds over to the customer. Now, the reason why this is a huge concern is that when customers see employees being negative towards either another employee, uncivil towards another employee, or to a customer, they do not want to do business with that organization. And so you start to lose your customer base. Customers don't want to have interactions with a culture that is not supportive. So we're trying to figure out how to reverse that and move from incivility to a place of mutual respect and belonging. So before I get into some solutions here, I want to talk about the populations that are more vulnerable to incivility. And so what the research has shown is that there are certain groups based on your personality or your status in an organization that really impacts the way you experience incivility, and also whether or not you're more likely to be targeted. And so for personality, what the research has shown is that when people have lower levels of emotional control, so these are individuals that are a little bit more neurotic, their emotional regulation, it's kind of up or down. This is just a part of the key personality traits that we track. And so when emotional control is low, agreeableness is low. So agreeableness is like how willing you are to accommodate or go along with others' requests. And so when these personality traits are low, when you experience ambiguous situations, right? Remember I mentioned the saying, good morning in the hallway and the person not responding, that's an ambiguous situation. So it's not direct. You can't figure out the intent. It's low intensity. They haven't tripped me in the hallway, right? They just did not respond. And so when you encounter situations that are ambiguous like that, these individuals are more likely to perceive it as an uncivil event, right? So these are populations that are a little bit more susceptible to the negative impact of incivility. Surprisingly, in personality traits that we often really adore in organization, like conscientiousness, that's someone's focus on a task, their ability to be detail oriented, to get things accomplished with a high level of dedication and focus and accountability, responsibility. These are all great traits. One thing people that are high in conscientiousness need to be aware of is that when they have these encounters, they're more likely to lean towards the side of attributing it to an uncivil behavior than kind of just a neutral, ambiguous event, right? Also surprising, people with high positive affect. So these are kind of the Tiggers in your organization. So people who are the cherry bursts of sunshine. I tend to be a high positive affect person myself. But you have to be aware. So it's good to know this information because there's this part of self-awareness. So if you know that about yourself, that people that are high in these traits, including positive affect, they're more likely to see ambiguous situations as uncivil. Then you would then be able to say, okay, well, this is kind of what I tend to do. So let me give this person the benefit of a doubt here, right? So there are certain personality traits that need to be a little bit more deliberate in evaluating the event, the encounter that happened, and processing that more effectively. For status, the research has shown that groups that are traditionally marginalized, so women, people of color, they tend to be more susceptible to incivility, workplace incivility. And we see this in that, these groups are often groups without great social networks in the organization. They might be already disconnected and they make prime targets for perpetrators. Similarly, things like tenure, less tenure. So if you haven't been there for a long time, you're just kind of starting out. I would even say, kind of the entry level positions of an organization, or if you're looking at an organizational chart, lower levels of that hierarchy on an organizational chart are typically more greater focuses of negative attention from some employees, more likely to experience incivil or uncivil behaviors. And so it's really important to kind of look at these groups as places that may need a little bit more support, right? So these are both with personality and status. These are places where we need to make sure that these groups have the social support that they need in order to be effective in the organization. Now, why is it happening? So we know that it's been increasing over time. A few reasons why it's happening. One of them is globalization. This concept is the fact that we've been spread out across, work has been spread out across different cultures. It might not actually be countries, but you have people from different cultures and different backgrounds all integrating within an organization. So there are literally many organizations that are cross-cultural in the sense of having national differences in culture. But we know that even if it's a mom and pop store, they're not inoculated against that. That you can have globalization taking place in those situations because you have people that are traveling and moving, and expatriates, and you have different people just coming together. Even if your company is within one particular area, you'll have people from all over the globe coming together to work together. And that presents a great opportunity for cross-fertilization of ideas, but it can also create potential for conflict. And so the issue that globalization poses to incivility is that we oftentimes have expectations about our culture or norms, and are more likely to have an ethnocentric viewpoint where we think our way of doing things are the best way. We might see this show up in an organization in terms of breaking a cultural norm like eye contact. I saw something in the chat about closeness, proximity of conversation. I think that was really about like someone in your face shouting. But we could even see this as a cross-cultural clash, a potential clash in culture where some cultures might see proximity as a good thing, and the fact that you're talking to them from over here might be viewed as rude in that culture, right? As opposed to being a little bit closer together. Some cultures, eye contact is viewed as negative. You shouldn't be looking. It's a sign of deference if you lower your eyes when you talk to someone that's in a higher position than you, right? In higher power distance cultures, you'll see that. But in the United States, it's a sign of respect to look someone in the eye when they talk to you. So causes of incivility usually come up due to global or cultural clashes that we see. There are also generational clashes. The study I think was done in 2012, but it was Twenge that actually found that she surveyed students, and she found that students were more self-focused than they were 25 years ago. This was Jean Twenge's research. And we're seeing those generational clashes where there are certain norms about civility that one generation used to have that are now outdated, right? So it's kind of a cross-cultural, across generations, an issue about beliefs and norms that are different. That's causing some conflict. Now, stress and burnout, I would put an underline or bold or something to highlight the fact that it shows up on causes and on outcomes. So not only is it predicting incivility, it's also a outcome of incivility. And so there's kind of this, it's a reciprocal effect, right? So stress causes incivility. Incivility leads to stress, and that stress causes incivility, and there's this awful feedback loop that's happening there. We know, I do not need to explain to anyone on this call how stressful, how stressed or as a society we have been across the globe, whether it's due to issues related to health, due to the pandemic, or just in general, stress related to greater levels of isolation or loss. There's a lot of loss that has happened. The burnout or stress from financial issues, economic instability, inflation, political concerns or political incivility that's being witnessed. That all leads to greater levels of stress, lower sleep, poor sleep, or having sleep deprivation can increase stress. We talk about things like exercise, less self-care is being practiced. People being overloaded. We're being asked to do a lot more with less, right? As this kind of across the board, we're seeing that in many organizations, people being asked to do more with less. And so it's kind of this idea of people saying, I have no time to be nice. I could send that email in a nicer way, but I don't have time, right? I just need to get it out quickly because I have 1,000 other things to get done. Yeah, so it's really a one of the biggest causes here, the stress and burnout that people have been experiencing, why we've seen so much incivility increases. Another problem is poor relationships. I mentioned isolation before, but one thing that social relationships give us, due to isolation, we probably lost a lot of our social networks, or those relationships have lost the quality that they used to have. What quality time has become kind of weaker than it used to be. And those poor relationships, actually, when we have better quality relationships, we get something that's wonderful, and it's called feedback in relationships. And that helps you become more self-aware, right? A friend will tell you, hey, Katherine, you're doing this. You need to stop that. Or, there's key pieces of feedback that you're missing when you're not in relationship with other people. And it not only helps to strengthen that relationship, it helps to strengthen your ability to be social with others in general. And so those poor relationships have led to incivility because people are missing out on getting feedback on their social skills. Technology, there has been greater levels of incivility using virtual communication. People tend to be more uninhibited, and so they'll say things that they wouldn't say to you face to face. Oftentimes technology is used inappropriately, so a medium that is not very rich, right, like an email, is being used to communicate something that definitely warrants a face-to-face conversation. So think about the risk of what you're saying being misinterpreted, and then match the level of richness of your technology medium to that specific conversation, right? So if it's something where things could be potentially misinterpreted and the risk of that being interpreted is high, there's a high cost to that, you probably want to set up a face-to-face meeting rather than pick the phone up or send an email on that topic. Organizational climate is also a cause of incivility. If you have a climate in which there already exists that incivility, like it's a norm, and you have leaders that are fairly passive about violations of civility, then you're more likely to see that spiraling effect happen, and people are just doing what they see. So you'll just see a social learning effect happen, and things can really get out of hand if the climate is already set up to be unsupportive and having poor norms or unclear norms about how to treat people in a civil way. Okay, let's talk about solutions. First thing on here is self-care. If you are in HR, this is a great opportunity to talk about your EAP. Talk about some of the great services that are offered in EAPs. Oftentimes these include things like crisis counseling, their nutrition plans. They're things that can help employees really take the time to take care of themselves. Encourage them to take personal days. To really spend time finding even setting up interest groups and helping them connect with other employees. This kind of ties in with another solution here. But yeah, the self-care piece is thinking about, are you getting enough exercise? Is your diet healthy? Encouraging things like that. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you taking time for yourself that's separate from work? Encouraging them to detach and having clear work and home, separations. That is so important. I think oftentimes because email is so accessible, especially I do it. I'm guilty of that. On my phone, I'm always on my email. And that it can really start to have negative effects on your family life. And the individuals that are able to effectively cope with incivility are able to detach from work, are able to say, I'm not going to think about this, I'm not going to ruminate about this. I'm going to step away and detach from this event. And so self-care is really important. It can be the buffer that people need in order to be more effective and deal with incivility in better ways rather than propagate it themselves. Building community. This is also important. Here in HR, I would encourage you to think about, before you get someone in, you want to hire for civility. So you want to ask behavioral questions that focus on that, like, tell me about a time that you encountered a stressful event and how you dealt with that. Right? How did you resolve that? And so hiring around incivility, or hiring around civility, could also look like making sure you're checking the references, making sure you're in the recruitment process, showing what your values are, selecting based on your values, screening on that, communicating that to your recruits. Once they arrived, like I mentioned, having interest groups where people can start to develop a sense of community, sense of social and emotional support. Also having things like social hours where people aren't just focused on tasks, just getting specific thing done, but they're focused on connecting and building a sense of belongingness and care, having that sense of mutual respect is important. Recognize civility, and I would also add speaking out against incivility. So recognizing civility, you want to look at your performance appraisal system and really make a note of what you're evaluating, right? So there are two things you want to pay attention to here. One is, are you focused more on individual gains more than group gains, right? So you're focused on rewarding how the individual is performing and not so much a community. If you focus on the individual, it can lead to a little bit more competition, right? So think about how you could integrate more social elements in that, rewarding people for helping behaviors. The other thing to make a note of is not only measuring what they did, but how they got it done, right? So not only checking off goals, but what was your process like? How did you involve others? How did you edify or mentor someone in this performance cycle? And so really building it into your mission, vision, values, goals, and tying your performance appraisal systems into that can be really important. I worked with an organization that had a award for people that demonstrated helping behaviors, and they wanted to recognize and celebrate that. And of course, that helped people feel like this is something that the organization really values, and we did see increases in helping and greater levels of civility through that. And then the last thing here is training leaders. And so with training leaders, a lot of times, like I said, leaders set the tone for civility. I'm sure you've been there where you've seen something happen and whether you're a newcomer in the organization and you haven't been indoctrinated to the culture yet, but you've seen something and in your heart that was wrong, but you see the leader has observed it, but nothing was done. It was kind of what we call a laissez-faire or passive leadership approach that person took. And I want you to trust your gut with things like this. If you're in a position to help train leaders, there are a few things that you can do here. One is to have a 360-degree feedback for the leaders. So if they're the ones actually engaging in the behavior, I think a lot of times, and the important thing to note here for these solutions, that a lot of times we often see people engaging in incivility out of ignorance, not out of intent, right? So they're doing it because they're clueless that how they're coming across. And so leaders, um, several leaders have found that very helpful to get 360-degree feedback. That means you're getting feedback. You provide feedback on yourself. You get feedback from people that supervise you, from people that are direct reports, and then also people that are considered peers. And that can really be eye-opening just to see all of those different pieces of perspectives come together to agree to, the fuller picture, all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. So that is one tool that can be really helpful for the leader. Even if the leader isn't one of the perpetrators, but they're just being passive, right? That is helpful feedback for them to know, which would show up in a 360-degree feedback. Another thing that you could do is that research has shown that transformational leaders are more effective than transactional leaders. And now a transformational leader is someone who is able to communicate a clear vision and goal and kind of inspire other people to want to work towards that goal. And so people are doing it out of passion. They're working for the organization out of passion, and less so for a transactional leader where it's more rewards and punishments that's motivating people. So the training that you provide for leaders can also be around helping them become more transformational leaders, so adopting that leadership style. There are specific trainings for civility. In nursing, we see things like the CREW, which stands for Civility, Respect, and Engagement at Work. And that type of training involves having weekly discussion groups and activities to improve the work climate. So that's something that you could explore. More specifically for leaders, that also encourage teaching them how to have difficult conversations, right? So, like I said, the solutions involve not only recognizing civility, but also making sure you address incivility as soon as you see it. Because otherwise people feel like this is the norm, nothing's going to change, no one got punished for anything, or nothing happened as a consequence of that behavior, and it was fairly easy for them to do, right? It's hard to regulate our emotions. So if someone's not engaging in that, and it's not being addressed, then it's likely to spiral. So teaching leaders how to have difficult conversations is important as well. And one quote I want to leave you with here for the solutions is that it's from Mary Montague. She says, civility costs nothing, but buys everything. So I think a lot of times leaders act the way they act because they feel that nice guys finish last. And in order to be a leader, I need to have this command and control style. That's not true. The research actually shows that when someone actually treats you with respect, you're more likely to be effective as a leader. People are more likely to want to follow you, to work with you, than when you have a more authoritarian type of leadership style. Right? So it's important not to confuse authoritative with being an authoritarian. Okay, so some key takeaways here. Is that workplace incivility is pretty bad. It can really have an impact. We talked about things like productivity, well-being, health. The one stat that I did not mention earlier was that let me put my note away here. So the APA did a study in 2015. They found that stress in the workplace costs the US economy $500 billion a year. In 2012, the Harvard School of Public Health tracked women for 10 years and found that stressful jobs were as bad for women's health as smoking and obesity. And so, yes, workplace incivility can have very deleterious effects, not only on productivity, the bottom line, it's expensive, but also on well-being, as bad as smoking and obesity. Women and workers of lower status are often more frequent targets of incivility. So you want to make sure that you're helping these groups adjust and find places of social support in the organization, practicing self-care, have mentorship programs that, can encourage people in these categories to find their voice and feel a little bit more like they belong, because that's what happens with incivility. It creates a sense of exclusion and a questioning on your abilities. And so having a mentorship program or some support groups or interest groups can really help build that up for those groups. Then organizational leaders, you have a role to play to prevent incivility. And I've highlighted several steps that can be taken. The most direct one is to seek feedback for yourself as a leader and to explore various training opportunities. There are direct ones that are related to incivility itself, but there are things that are more general around just getting feedback and even adopting a more transformational style rather than being more transactional with your employees. Okay, thank you.
All right. Oh. Hello, everyone again. That was amazing. I'm sure that we could still have another whole hour of your insights, Dr. Hamilton, but this is what we got, and it was amazing. So thank you, Dr. Hamilton, and thank you to everybody who attended. If you are looking for the recording or the slides, we are going to be sharing those to you via email, and you'll be able to access it on our website as well on demand. So if you're looking to review and take notes or learn more, or just kind of go over the presentation a couple more times, share with somebody, then you will have access to it. And that is all I have got to say. So thank you again, Dr. Hamilton. And yeah, any last words there?
Ali, I didn't get a chance to go through the chat. So if there are any questions or Q&A, I'd be happy to take them afterwards and respond by email or somehow posting it on some shared space. So if that's a possibility.
That's a great call. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We didn't have time for Q&A because there was obviously so many good tidbits that we had to fit into the actual hour, but keep an eye on our TINYpulse LinkedIn page and or your email. And we'll be sure to post something like that in conjunction with Dr. Hamilton's answers to your questions. So that's a wrap. I think. All right, everybody, enjoy your evening and thanks again. Take care.